Happy Mother's Day! Today we will be making faux etched glass jars with a Mother's Day theme. You can fill these jars with anything your mother would like, from flowers to candies to bath products. The first step in this process is to create a stencil that you can adhere to your glass jar. I made my stencil in Microsoft Word and printed it out on regular printer paper so that it will say MOM with a heart for the O. Because I printed it out on printer paper, it would be a little bit difficult to trace around normally with a pencil. So instead, I'm using a highlighter overlapping the edge of my printer paper to get a nice, clean, easy line on my contact paper. You will see that I am putting my stencil face down on the back of my contact paper before I try to trace. This way, when I peel the contact paper off of its backing and use its built-in adhesive to stick it to the jar, all of my letters will be the right way up. Once I have the entire item highlighted, I went back with a Sharpie and just defined the edges a little bit more so when I cut it out, I would have a clear line. I also decided to reposition my heart to make it a little more centered between the two M's. Once I had everything traced, I very carefully cut out the letters using just one small snip in from the bottom to get into the letter. Remember, you want to make sure to have the negative space around the letters be continuous and in one piece. So if you have to chop up the inside of the letter in order to facilitate cutting, that's preferable to cutting around the outside. To cut everything out neatly and in one piece, save the pieces that you just removed, the letter M, the heart, etc., because you will be able to use those in the future. Because this is clear contact paper, you could stick them onto a jar of your own or other item of your own choosing to make it look like a little bit of a frosted glass, or you could use it to make a negative stencil where you would have a clear window with the etched or frosted glass technique around the outside of the shape. Once you have everything cut out, carefully peel the backing off of one side of your stencil and carefully place that one corner that you've peeled onto your jar. The contact paper will peel off of the glass, so you can reposition it if you need to. And you want to make sure to get everything as smooth and as in place as you can so that you don't have any gaps or bubbles where the paint can leak through. By carefully placing one small section and then peeling off a little bit more of the backing to expose the next section, you can adhere the stencil to the jar without worrying about the piece that you aren't currently working on sticking to itself or the table or the wrong part of the jar. It stays safe with its backing on. Make sure to mix your paint into the varnish at the very last second. Mine had sat in its little condiment cup overnight and was a little bit thick and did not give quite as much of an etched glass as it did more of a frosted or even a painted or aged glass. I found that the easiest way to hold the jar was to take off the lid and spread my fingers out inside the jar. And that way I could hold it and rotate it easily without worrying about getting my fingers into any of what I was working on. So you want to make sure to put just a few drops of paint into your varnish and stir it thoroughly. Remember, you can always add more paint if it's not thick enough or opaque enough, but you can't take away paint. Once you have your paint and varnish mixed, take enough onto your sponge that you can fill the entire letter. But don't pull, because it will just streak and you won't have anything on the jar. If you end up with obvious sponge lines and you can see where the square of the sponge was, very, very, very lightly go back over where you had painted, and it will pull up just enough of the paint and varnish mixture to make it look more even and more like etched glass. Once you are done painting, you want to peel the stencil off the jar immediately. If you let it sit even just for a few minutes, because this is a fairly quick dry time, it will peel and take some of the paint off with it. You want to try and peel the stencil off while the paint is still wet so that it gives you the cleanest line. If you find that taking the stencil off does remove some of the paint and gives you splotches or jagged lines, just pick up your sponge, and if you have a steady hand, you can go back over where the outline should be and fill it in. Just make sure to go very lightly, because you don't want to have things dry in two different opacities or two different shades of white. So you can see on my jar, you can see a little bit where I went back over it to try and fill in where the stencil had ripped off pieces of paint. This is why I say to be very lightly, but after drying overnight, I think it looks pretty good. Now, my mother specifically asked for Dove dark chocolate. So I just filled the jar, put on the lid, gift for my mother that she can reuse in a ton of different ways and always know how much I love her.